Hello there, and welcome to the Isms and Schisms podcast, the podcast that tries to make theology accessible to everyone. Well, those who speak English. Until I find a program that can translate into other languages, there's probably some AI thing out there that could do something. I don't speak any other languages, unfortunately, except for a little bit of ancient Greek and ein bisschen Deutsche. But I do know theology, and New Testament stuff, and church history. If you're new here, my name is Aaron Chidsey, and I have a PhD in theology and have recently started a job at a leadership institute where we train people up to be leaders for a better future, which has been a lot of fun. And I do also do some lecturing in theology. And I want this podcast to make theology accessible and fun and make it as unpretentious as possible. I do lean toward the critical end of things, but no matter where you place yourself on the theological spectrum, you are welcome here. I think theology is first and foremost about experiencing and exploring God and the world and the nature of humanity. It is fundamentally relational and dynamic. I think doctrine is important and helpful, but not the most important thing. And that our doctrines should constantly be challenged and put to the test and should be updated as we learn more about the world around us and about ourselves. What I want is for you to expand your mind and to think about things from a different perspective. I do also like to make things practical where I can. Those of you who have listened to all of my episodes might be surprised by that because I do like exploring the weird and abstract. But this episode is probably the most practical of all of them. This episode is about a philosophical system that has inspired so many people over the years and has equally been misunderstood by many others. But it is a deeply and profoundly practical philosophy. Personally, I find this way of thinking helpful and empowering and the sort of thing that can be synthesized or integrated into any way of life. It is perfectly compatible with Christianity, and I would say, and I will outline in this episode, that Christianity was in no small part influenced by, and that everyone can find practical wisdom in, the ancient art of Stoicism. What I want to say right from the start is that Stoicism is not about repressing emotion, about not feeling or avoiding feeling anything, about having a constant stiff upper lip. Today, the word stoic basically means to be emotionless, apathetic, indifferent, uncaring, and is often associated with things like toxic masculinity. But that's absolutely not what the practice of Stoicism is all about. Stoicism is not at all about getting rid of emotion. In fact, I'd probably say that real Stoicism is about feeling those emotions even more intensively, but that it manages unhelpful or harmful emotions and teaches us how to prevent our emotions from causing us to act in ways we would later regret or are out of character or prevent us from reaching our potential. So it's not about not having emotion, but about not allowing the self to get swept away by emotion. Stoicism was founded by the Athenian philosopher Zeno, who, around 300 BC, was shipwrecked and lost almost everything. This spurred him on to reflect on the nature of life and how to attain inner peace. He developed some ideas about goodness and peace and humility, whose works went on to influence philosophers like Chrysippus, Seneca, Epictetus, and the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius. And in fact, Stoicism probably owes its continued existence to Chrysippus, who systematized Zeno's ideas, even though we've lost all of the works of Chrysippus. Zeno spent much of his life gathering by a painted porch with his disciples for discussion. In Greek, painted porch was stoa poikile, which is where the movement got its name, Stoicism. As a philosophical system, Stoicism emphasizes maintaining self-control to overcome negative emotions and stresses the need for clear objectivity. That is, not allowing emotion to cloud the mind. And quite possibly the best way to introduce Stoicism is by quoting the master. Fear is the path to the dark side. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering. Or do not. There is no try. That, of course, comes from the great philosopher Yoda. The Jedi Order of the Star Wars franchise is very stoic, though also Buddhist and a bunch of other stuff. The whole get rid of attachments, don't fall in love, that sort of thing, that's not completely Stoicism. So good news, you can be a Stoic and still marry a senator. Hooray! Or, of course, someone who is not a senator. You can get married, if you want. You also don't have to. We also see Stoicism in Frank Herbert's June. Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings total obliteration. I will face my fear. I will permit it to pass over me and through me. And when it has gone past, I will turn the inner eye to see its path. Where the fear has gone, there will be nothing. Only I will remain. And perhaps the wisest of them all, Bluey's dad, Bandit Healer. Obstacles do not block the path, they are the path. Stoicism encourages and teaches self-mastery, perseverance, mental strength, and resilience. It is a thoroughly, fundamentally practical way of life. It teaches us to not hide from unwanted emotions, but to face them, address them, deal with them, and move on. Marcus Aurelius said,
"Today I escaped from anxiety. Or no, I discarded it, because it was within me, in my own perceptions, not outside."
And Seneca said of fear and worry,
"A man who suffers before it is necessary suffers more than is necessary."
Or a very easy, simplified summary of Stoicism could be this. If it is within your control, do something about it. If it is not within your control, don't worry about it. If it's out of your hands, if it is yet to come, or if it's in the past, if there's nothing you can do about it right here, right now, in this moment, put it out of your mind and focus on what you should be doing. Otherwise, the external forces of everything happening around you will slow you down. It was Zeno who said, "We have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so we should listen more than we say." Which is now the sort of thing that people tell children, and is a policy that should be implemented in parliamentary debates. A lot of politicians could probably learn something from Zeno. But the point of what he is saying here is restraint. Don't be impulsive and say the first thing that comes to your mind, but wait, listen, learn, reflect, and make sure you know everything before you make a decision. The system of Stoicism is built around 4 cardinal virtues. These virtues are wisdom, justice, courage, and moderation. These are the essentials. Marcus Aurelius said that if you should come across anything better than these 4, it must be an extraordinary thing indeed. So the first of these is wisdom. And if you have been listening to my podcast for a while, you should be well accustomed to being in the presence of wisdom. Wisdom is also about humility, which is something I abound in.
Okay.
And about making good decisions, having discretion, being resourceful, and ever seeking more knowledge. Wisdom is something that comes through a lifelong journey of learning and experience. It is about reflecting on everything that comes your way, always growing, always rethinking, always challenging yourself, always thinking critically and imaginatively and carefully. It is about being humble, accepting the fact that we are probably wrong about almost everything. When we accept that fact, then we can truly learn, and we can truly grow and become better people. A simple thing you can do every day to grow in wisdom is to read. I really think that people who do not take time out of their busy schedules to carve out a little bit of space to read are doing themselves a huge disservice. And I mean a really, really huge disservice. There's so much literature out there about the enormous benefits of reading both fiction and non-fiction, that it teaches you empathy, expands your vocabulary, increases your capacity to think deeply and widely, and it's just such a good way to unwind. But of course, you'd have to read that to learn that. And don't worry about what you're reading or how fast you're reading. Read at your own level, whatever level that is, and enjoy it. Try to challenge yourself just that little bit, perhaps read a new genre or a different perspective on an issue, or just that little bit quicker or longer. And then read my book when it comes out. I haven't really even started writing it yet, but when it does come out one day, you should read it. But the point here is to remain a lifelong student, reflect and listen and act wisely. The next is justice, which is about fighting for equity when you see inequity, remaining honest, and elevating fairness. It's about doing the right thing, which is huge in Stoicism. It's about putting your own comfort, leisure, time, perhaps even your own safety aside to push for something worth pushing for. It is easy to just stay in your comfort zone, to uncritically fall into the status quo, to merely do or to believe that which everyone has done or believed for 1,000 years. To go with the majority is the easiest thing in the world. But if you notice something that is not right or is not good, you must act. You've got to do something, even if that thing will cost you or will mean that people will dislike you or perhaps hurt you. Do the right thing. Third is courage, which is more than being brave, which is a big part of courage, of course, but is also about resilience, endurance, and industriousness, about having confidence in yourself and what you are doing. That if it is the right thing to do, you will have the courage and the strength and the willpower to do it and to keep doing it. Essentially, courage is doing whatever is needed despite everything. It is not the absence of fear, but acting despite the fear, acting despite the pain, despite the grief, despite the obstacle. Seneca said,
You have passed through life without an opponent. No one can ever know what you are capable of, not even you.
Every tragedy and every misfortune may suck, but they are, in truth, opportunities. These are the moments when you can show the world, or even more importantly, show yourself what you are capable of, how strong you are. If you get knocked over, are you going to sit there crying, or will you stand up stronger than before? If you come across something hard, will you let the occasion hold you down, or will you rise to meet the challenge and make a real difference in the world? And it's very easy to compare your problems with someone else's. You can complain that it's unfair that your life may be harder than your friends, and perhaps it is. But complaining will do nothing except make you bitter, and that bitterness will make you brittle. Your challenges are yours alone. Their challenges are theirs alone. Different people have different capacities, but what you need to do is to play the hand that you have been dealt. Focus only on what you can control. The fourth and final virtue is moderation, or temperance. This is about maintaining self-control and having discipline. Moderation is doing nothing in excess. Courage is good, But too much courage with too little restraint is reckless, and that is not good. So have the wisdom and the courage to do precisely what is required. Whatever you do, make sure it is the right thing to do. So just take a moment to breathe, to think, to do that which humans do. Trust in reason and rationality. Only do that which is excellent. And that means working as efficiently and effectively as possible. Don't procrastinate. Don't doom scroll. Don't be lazy. Do the hard thing so that you can look back on your life and see that you didn't waste any of your potential. These 4 virtues the Stoics claimed were just the best.
Awesome.
In fact, they believed virtue is the only good. Things like health and pleasure are neutral. They are neither good nor bad. But if you can remain virtuous, you will attain happiness and well-being. Opposed to these virtues are the vices, which are the parallels of the 4 key virtues: foolishness, injustice, cowardice, and intemperance, or impulsiveness, or a lack of restraint. These are things to be overcome. A goal of Stoicism is achieving eudaimonia, which is not a viral infection, even though that's what the word sounds like. It is actually a concept which doesn't have a direct English equivalent, but generally means fulfillment, happiness, well-being, flourishing, contentment, purpose. The sort of feeling you get when you spend all day fixing your garden reticulation and it actually works. Or is that just me? I really like gardening, but I really hate fixing sprinklers. But when they work the way they're meant to, it's beautiful. Eudaimonia is different to happiness in that it allows for difficulty or even suffering. It's a recognition that the world is sometimes difficult or that sometimes life downright sucks. Pain exists and there's no way to avoid it. But achieving eudaimonia means facing that difficulty and pain and getting on with it anyway and finding purpose and fulfillment. It's about striving towards something bigger than the self, about making a difference in the world and the lives of the people around us. That at the end of our lives, we can look back and see that despite the pain, the difficulties, the uphill battles, the setbacks, the frustrations, what we accomplished in spite of all of that mattered, and that it was worthwhile. Another way of thinking about it is to live in agreement with nature. Nature, in terms of the rationally ordered universe within which all events and occurrences take their place, so cosmically structured, some Stoics called this fate. And nature, in terms of natural or innate inclination or manner, the unique way objects exist. It is the nature of a human, for example, to reason. So, humans should be reasonable, because that's what makes them human. They should live lives of virtue, of wisdom, justice, courage, and moderation, free of unhelpful or harmful passions or desires. The perfect Stoic, the sage, is one who is entirely resilient and unmoved by misfortune. This is not to say that one should not feel grief from that misfortune, but that grief will not become a hindrance. Indeed, it may be possible to turn that grief into something positive if one learns and grows as a result. Very, very few people actually become the perfect sage, but it is the ideal to work toward. There are many similarities between Stoicism and the teachings of the Bible. The Bible is very diverse, so there are places where they don't cohere perfectly, but there are plenty of places, especially the teachings of Jesus and the writings of Paul, where the Bible is teaching pretty much the same thing as the Stoic philosophers. In fact, I would go so far, and it's not just me saying this, there's lots of academics who say this too, that parts of the New Testament aren't just similar to Stoicism, but were actively influenced by Stoicism. Paul at least knew Stoicism. He had read or had heard Stoic philosophy. because he quotes it favorably. In Acts chapter 17, Paul quotes, "For in him we live and move and have our being, and for we too are his offspring." And then notes that some of their own poets say this. Specifically, he was quoting Epimenides and then Aratus, a student of Zeno himself. Paul was quoting Stoic literature. Some have even argued that Paul was a Stoic himself. I wouldn't go so far as to say that Jesus and Paul were card-carrying Stoics, but I think they were aware of many different schools of thoughts and drew influence from lots of places, Stoicism among them. So it's not so much that they were students of Stoic philosophy, but perhaps they were, but that Stoicism was widespread and a common topic of discussion. It had been around for centuries before Jesus and was very widespread. So it's probably not surprising that Stoicism had pervaded all corners of the Hellenistic world, including Judea. Now, I should clarify that Stoicism is steeped within a Hellenistic worldview and advocates for a sort of pantheism and allows for the worship of many Greek gods. The idea of fate is dictated by divine forces, and that's why one should abandon themselves to the direction that fate is taking them in, because the gods have providentially placed that upon your life. So Stoicism isn't absolutely or perfectly compatible with Christianity entirely, in terms of theology and metaphysics, though the Stoic understanding of fate does have some echoes in Christian doctrines of predestination and the like, and the Stoics called this force the logos, the word, wisdom, the natural way of things. And the author of the Gospel of John borrows this idea and personifies it in Jesus, drawing that Stoic idea of the logos into a more Jewish way of thinking about wisdom. But the practical wisdom and ethics of Stoicism is the part I'm focusing on, which I think absolutely influenced some of the thought of the biblical writings. Those four central cardinal virtues of Stoicism are all well represented in the Bible. Wisdom, justice, courage, and moderation are all significant themes throughout both the Old and the New Testament, as is the need to avoid their corresponding vices. In Ephesians 1, the Holy Spirit is called the Spirit of wisdom, and in Ecclesiastes, wisdom is said to make someone more physically attractive, which obviously I can attest to in myself. I'll let you decide whether that is a good thing or not. Throughout Proverbs, wisdom and foolishness are common themes, often played against one another. One who is wise turns away from evil, but a fool is careless. The way of a fool is right in his own eyes, but a wise man listens to advice. Doing wrong is like a joke to a fool, but wisdom is pleasure to a person of understanding, and so on. Proverbs 16 says that it is much better to get wisdom than gold. Justice and injustice are spoken about all throughout the scriptures. Isaiah instructs their audience to learn to do good, to seek justice, correct oppression, bring justice to the fatherless. Micah chapter 6 asks, "What does the Lord require of you?" And then answers, "Do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with your God." In Amos, "Let justice roll down like waters." And in Proverbs, "When justice is done, it is a joy to the righteous." And it goes on, there's heaps. Fighting injustice and oppression is basically the heartbeat of the Bible, from God pulling his people out of slavery,
Yay!
to again pulling his people out of slavery,
Yay!
to getting annoyed at his people for not pulling others out of slavery,
Oh.
and just constantly urging people to just give a damn about other people and be willing to put yourself last for the sake of another. Courage, again, a common theme. Be strong and courageous, it says in Joshua and Deuteronomy. Do not be frightened, for the Lord your God is with you. The author of 2 Timothy says that God gave us a spirit not of fear, but of power and love and self-control. The psalmist says, "Be strong and let your heart take courage." Paul said to the Corinthians, "Stand firm in the faith, be courageous, be strong." Jesus calls us to take up our cross, to follow the narrow path, to rejoice when difficulties come our way, to do the hard thing no matter the cost to ourselves. Get over yourself and get it done. On the other side, cowards are equated in Revelation with murderers. So it's taken pretty seriously. And in Proverbs, cowards are wicked, and the righteous are as bold as lions. Finally, self-control, moderation, discipline, again, all reflected throughout the Bible. As I just mentioned, the author of 2 Timothy equates self-control with courage. It's about putting all your desires and passions and wants to the side and doing what needs to be done. Paul says to the Corinthians that in order to endure, you've got to train and work hard. He says, "I discipline my body and keep it under control, lest after preaching to others, I myself should be disqualified." Proverbs 25 says that a person who lacks self-control is like a city whose walls are broken, and that it is not good to eat much honey, nor is it glorious to seek one's own glory. In Titus, one of the characteristics of a bishop is self-control. Take control of the self so that you are not taken control of. Other similarities include an emphasis on serving others, on humility, freedom from passion, and freedom through slavery. Jesus' golden rule is reflected in Seneca, who said, "Wherever there is a human being, there is an opportunity for kindness." Getting revenge is prohibited in both. Marcus Aurelius said that the best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury. Remember, Marcus Aurelius was a Roman emperor, one of the most powerful people in the world, who could quite easily have been vindictive and no one would have questioned him. But he thought revenge was silly and was allowing yourself and your very being to be molded and shaped and negatively influenced by another person or something external to the self. Where the Bible says, "Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything let your requests be made known to God, and the peace of God will guard your hearts and your minds, and cast all your anxieties on him. And therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life. Look at the birds of the air. And which of you, by being anxious, can add a single hour to his span of life?" The Stoics would say, true happiness is to enjoy the present without anxious dependence upon the future, not to amuse ourselves with either hopes or fears, but to rest satisfied. A wise man is content with his lot, whatever it may be, without wishing for what he has not. And there is only one way to happiness, and that is to cease worrying about things which are beyond the power of our will. Anger is another similarity, or rather the imperative to be slow to anger. We read in Proverbs that whoever is slow to anger has great understanding, and he who has a hasty temper exalts folly. And in Psalms, to refrain from anger, fret not yourself, it tends only to evil. James instructs to be slow to anger, for the anger of a man does not produce the righteousness of God. And in Ephesians, do not let the sun go down on your anger. Seneca said,
There is no more stupefying thing than anger, nothing more bent on its own strength. If successful, none more arrogant. If foiled, none more insane.
He also advised that the greatest remedy for anger is delay, which is actually really brilliant advice. A modern paraphrase could be, just be chill. Take a deep breath, have a dram of whiskey, put it out of your mind for now, and return to the issue tomorrow. You may find it doesn't upset you as much. Another great quote comes from Epictetus.
Another person will not hurt you without your cooperation. You are hurt the moment you believe yourself to be.
I would just like to note that some of these things are not all entirely bad. anxiety, stress, and worry are actually all good emotions in their place. They are perfectly natural and are geared toward your own survival. Without stress, you would never get anything done, and that would make you a bad stoic, possibly a bad person too. If you feel anxious, that's also okay. It means you care and are concerned about something, and that something's safety. Also, anger can be good. Anger can be a perfectly valid response to injustice, and it is anger that spurs you on to action. Within Stoicism, this is fine. But it becomes a problem if your emotions conflict with the 4 cardinal virtues: justice, courage, wisdom, self-control, and within a Christian framework we might add love to that list of cardinal virtues. But anger, for example, could be a just response to something unjust. And you can make the wise decision to steel yourself and to discipline yourself to right that wrong. But when that anger causes you to lose self-control or to do something unwise or unjust, then it's a problem. So it's all about controlling your emotions and using them to your advantage in such a way that you do not lose your cool, compromise your character, or inhibit your goals. So I think there's lots of overlap, but not everyone has thought so. Some people think that just because it didn't come from the Bible, that it is quote-unquote secular, that it is bad. That, I think, is silly, just silly, and contradicts the biblical notion that humans are made in the image and likeness of a rational God. In any case, the early patristics, or the church fathers, considered Stoicism to be pagan philosophy. From the 2nd century onwards, Platonism started to influence Christian theology quite a lot more significantly, which is when Christians started to create a distinction between an immaterial soul and the material body. In fact, Platonism, which, just like Stoicism, is a Hellenistic philosophical system, has had a great deal of influence on Christian theology, as did Aristotelianism in the 13th century. And I find that quite ironic. But let's just quickly cover a handful of practical tenets that you might find helpful. The first is memento mori, which is Latin for remember your death. In other words, and I'm sorry if no one has ever told you this before, but you will die. Everyone dies. That's just kind of what happens. But rather than letting that be a morbid idea, let it inspire you to make the most of every day. The fact that one day there will be no more days makes this day all the more significant. Make the most of the time you have. Don't waste it in front of the TV or at a job that you hate. Marcus Aurelius said,
Think of yourself as dead. You have lived your life. Now take what is left and live it properly.
Another is amor fati. It is Latin for love your fate.
I love you.
Learn to love the unique challenges and difficulties, as well as all the good things that come your way. They are out of your control. This is the hand that you were dealt. So learn to love it and make the most of it. I think of Gandalf with Frodo, when Frodo says, I wish this didn't all happen, that the ring didn't come to me, that I didn't get stabbed by a goth with some demon dagger. And Gandalf says, suck it up, you whiny little brat. Not quite. He said, so do all who live to see such times. But that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us. Related to amor fati is the idea that when we are faced with an obstacle, we shouldn't turn and run, but we should embrace the obstacle as an opportunity to demonstrate what we are truly capable of and as an opportunity to grow. Think of it as weightlifting. Lifting weights is hard. It literally tears your muscle, which is kind of gross, but it ultimately makes you stronger. And when you are stronger, you can lift heavier stuff. And eventually, I'll be able to lift the coffee table in my living room. But if life is incredibly easy for you, that you don't get torn down once in a while, you won't grow stronger. That's not to say that difficult things are necessarily good, but it's a mindset, a posture, one where you turn the disadvantage into an advantage. And if you can do that, there's literally no stopping you. Yeah! Marcus Aurelius said,
"The impediment to action becomes action."
Another which I think is really good is to be hard on the self, but easy on others. Remember that different people have different capabilities and capacities, and all sorts of stuff that you know nothing about. What seems easy to you might be incredibly hard for them. Now, you shouldn't go too hard on yourself. Another Stoic principle is at the end of every day, you should forgive yourself. Tomorrow is a new day. So you hold the two in tension, set a high standard for yourself, and do your best to reach that standard. But if you don't get there, don't beat yourself up. Just try again tomorrow. And as you go, be gracious toward others, because what they do is entirely out of your control, but what you do is entirely within your own control. A final few quick ones. Get out of bed early. I love the quiet and the still of the morning when it's still dark and everyone is still in bed. And if I start the day well, I have a good day. Win the morning, win the day. Next, put the phone away. Phone addiction is a real addiction. If the first thing you look at and the last thing you look at is your phone, not only are you doing literal physical damage to your eyes and your brain, but it dulls your senses and wastes so much time. It's fine to look through your socials every now and again, but it will suck you into a virtual world that is just an absolute pit. I leave my phone in a different room when I go to bed, so I don't look at it, but instead I read. And then in the morning, I don't look at it until after I've done some more reading in the morning. Seriously, cannot recommend that highly enough. Finally, stick to your priorities. What do you want to accomplish in your life? What are your dreams? You will not accomplish those dreams unless you prioritize them. Are you one of those people who say, one day I'll write a novel, or start going to the gym, or get into a good reading habit, or start eating healthily, or whatever it is? If you always say, one day, seriously, that day will never come. Remember your death, memento mori. You may not have it tomorrow. Whatever it is, start today. Start right now. Well, after this podcast. Now, I find those principles really quite liberating and empowering. They're not easy, but if you can put them into practice, even if just a little bit, I guarantee you will live a better, happier, and more productive life. But at this point, I have spoken for far too long. If you would like more, and I am by no means paid to say this, I don't actually get paid anything for this podcast, but the works of Ryan Holiday are really good. I have found them to be really helpful. So that's Ryan Holiday. This episode has been a little bit different to the usual isms and schisms. I hope you found it interesting and helpful. Now put it into practice. Seriously, do it. Do it right now. Don't wait. Because, again, you might die tomorrow or in 10 seconds, so don't waste your time. Also, if you start sooner rather than later, that just gives you so much extra time to just keep getting better at whatever it is that you are doing. Let me finish by quoting that verse from Micah. He has told you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you but to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God. This episode was recorded on the traditional lands of the Whadjuk Noongar people. I look forward to exploring more isms and schisms with you. And in the meantime, don't forget to rate and review and share with someone.